Hi, I'm Kristin Molitor. Welcome to the Transforming Hearts podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Ministry Formation. We believe that transforming the church starts with transforming hearts. Join us as we explore ministry through the lens of relationship and accompaniment. Together, let's journey towards growth, healing, and transformation. Hello and welcome to the Transforming Hearts podcast. This is Kristin with the Institute for Ministry Formation. And today we have a very special guest on our show. We have Gary Fritsch, who serves as Director of Evangelization at Saints Martha and Mary Parish in North Pittsburgh. And he's also author of the book Catching Fire, Relating the Ancient to the Everyday. Gary was a student in our SD1 Art of Accompaniment course and has a lot of expertise to share in his ministry, especially around accompaniment and evangelization and the role that vulnerability plays in that. But before Gary worked full-time in evangelization, he had a pretty successful career in health insurance. So it'll be fun to hear his story and what led him into ministry and the role that vulnerability and accompaniment really played in his own faith journey. So, Gary, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you here.
Kristin, I'm super excited to be here with you. As always, I always enjoy our conversations. And it's funny, I think sometimes that I would love for, after I have a conversation, I wish that like other people could listen in, like, oh, man, that was a great conversation. I wish other people could hear it. So yeah, we have that opportunity now. So I've always loved my conversations with you. So now everybody gets to listen in.
So Gary, why don't we just start off today? If you could just share a little bit about yourself and your background and your faith journey, and then what led you into your current position serving in ministry.
Absolutely. You know, I feel so blessed to have been to be now on this side of my story, and I spent 25 years in the healthcare insurance industry and doing mostly high-level consulting work. I worked with Fortune 500 companies all over the country. I would go and present to executives, CEOs, COOs, heads of human resource, and so that was the area that I worked in for many years, and it was a beautiful skill-building training ground for me for evangelization. And during that time, I was being a Catholic dad. I was trying to do the Catholic things, and but I'll be honest, I didn't really have a relationship with the Lord. Mm-hmm. So, and I think for me, I always look back at a period in my life in high school and thereafter where I was really involved in a lot of very unsavory things. As I often say, I was doing all the things your mom warns you about. So anyway, I was carrying that baggage with me, even as a dad, as an adult. And it came to the point where I kind of knew that I had to unburden myself of that. It was really holding me back. And a friend of mine said, well, you can make an appointment with a priest to do confession. I'm like, really? Didn't know that was a thing. But I was like, well, what priest will I do that with? And there was a Franciscan who used to come and say Mass at our parish, Father Phil Fink, God rest his soul, beautiful man. But he was very good from the pulpit, always had a joke. And I didn't realize this other part of it right away. But he also was very humble and vulnerable. Mm. He would often share his difficulty, his stumblings, his failings. And I didn't have that right away as a reason why I was attracted to him as a person. We had some brief conversations, and when it came time for me to find somebody to make a confession to, he was the one that I called on, and I went and I sat there and shared with him things that I had never told another human being. Mm-hmm. About my life, things that I had done, things that had been done to me. And it was hard. And I remember in the midst of this, I have my head's down. I can't, we're sitting right across from each other. But my head's down, and I'm crying tears and snot and everything ugly about that. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, he has to be judging me. How could he not be after the things I just shared with him? And I looked up, and I remember that the look in his eyes was nothing but love and concern and compassion.
Oh, wow.
And he said, Gary, it must have been so hard. Well, I met Jesus right there. That was the spot. It was all sort of centered on his beginning point of being vulnerable. Invited me into that space of vulnerability. And he did it from the pulpit, which is kind of amazing, right? And so I always thought for myself then, as going into evangelization, by the way, from that point forward, I really didn't want to do anything else but whatever God had for me. And it became apparent over the course of the next couple of years that because I had tons of experience as a public speaker, as an influencer, that was my job. My job was to influence people when I went into the room and talk them into product services, and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it became pretty clear what the Lord was calling me to. And that always served for me as a model of, you have to let people know how imperfect you are, so that they'll realize that there's not that barrier for them. And that's been maybe a key part of my ministry, of my writing, of my speaking. And then in my one-on-one ministry with people, that's been at the core of it.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your testimony and your story, and just how through the loving connection of the priest, both in his vulnerability, this openness of heart, this letting you see him, created a space to let him see you. And I love how Brené Brown talks about how shame's remedy is to allow ourselves to be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. And it's that place of being seen is that place of encounter. And I love how you said, Gary, that's really the space where you met Jesus. And it was a place of conversion, and it was a turning point for you in committing your life to ministry.
Yeah. Well, I was always every day grateful for it. But I think there is something about being seen. And one of my favorite prayers for myself and to encourage others is just to say, Lord, see me, opening ourselves up and say, see everything, see all the bad parts, see the bad feelings, see the bad thoughts, see every nitty-gritty part of me, see it all.
Yeah, Lord, see me. That's such a beautiful prayer and a bold prayer. Because I right?
To be honest, there's a lot of times when I don't want to pray it,
Exactly.
I'm not ready. I'm not I have to get myself kind of geared up for that even now. So that's important. Really related concept to that a lot of people don't get is that God is, this is going to sound like a weird statement, but I'll say it anyway. God is attracted to our sin. And that sounds really, why would he be attracted to our sin? I always give the example that when I was a young dad and my girls were small, they'd be playing with Christmas presents or whatever, and invariably like Barbie's arm would break off or something, and I would see it from across the room, and I would know that I could just pop it back in there. And so knowing that I could fix it, I would encourage them, bring that over here. Come on, bring it over.
Mm-hmm.
Lovingly, encouraging them to bring it over because I knew I could fix it. And when I did, their difficulty goes away, their sorrow goes away, their joy returns. This is what God is looking for us. So when he sees our sin, he's attracted to it because he wants invited into it so that he can fix it. And he wants us to be confident that he can fix it. So I think that's a story that I share with people very often, and they always tell me, like, I've never thought about it that way. I've never considered that God might want to see my sin.
To be moved, to be attracted, to enter in, to restore, to love. That's really who he is. But I know that it can be hard, maybe because in our own experiences of relationships that maybe have left wounds in us, where we feel that we have to take care of everything by ourselves, or we'll be rejected, or we have to be super responsible, that it can be difficult to bring these things to the Lord. But how beautiful that God loves us through other people. And so in the example of your story, Gary, how that priest really showed you in a concrete, physical way how God loves you, how he sees you, how he enters into your story, how he attunes, how he connects, how he fixes, how he makes whole. And it was through the loving gaze of another that became real and concrete for you.
Yeah, and honestly, like, Kristin, one of the beautiful things about it is it built in me a desire to be that for others.
Yeah.
And that's boy, is that the call of Christianity, right? That we bring his love and mercy. This Sunday, we're going to have in the gospel the story of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus turns this whole thing on its ear. The guy says, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus turns it around to say, like, who are you going to be neighbor to? Mm-hmm. And so, like, how will you become neighbor to other people? And you do it. And the guy defines it. He says, the one who showed mercy, right? And so we're called to be the ones that show mercy. And by doing that, we make neighbors of all of those around us. And if we're not, then we're not living the Christian life. If we're not making that effort to be the one that shows mercy, introduces mercy into the world. And there are so many places in the world where that does not exist.
Yeah. And there's this book called The Broken Way by Anne Voskamp. I don't know if you've heard of Anne Voskamp before. She's not a Catholic author, but her writing is very Eucharistic. And what I love about that book is how she talks about this generosity in sharing brokenness and how that leads to communion. And so she always felt like, gosh, to be a neighbor, to be someone who helps, I have to share my gifts and my talents and be generous in sharing all those things with my neighbor. And that's true until someone had challenged her. But are you being generous in sharing your brokenness? Because it's actually from that place that will lead others into communion with you. Either a place for you to be loved when you share your brokenness, or it becomes an invitation then to someone to share their brokenness with you. And so it's like that Eucharist, when the bread breaks and is offered and given, is when we are led into deeper communion with one another. And so I think about that a lot, like, how generous am I in sharing my brokenness with the Lord, with other people, and knowing that those parts of my story that I don't want anybody to see usually become the very things that set others free when I share them, usually become the very things that allow me to experience love and connection and mercy. And so coming out of hiding and sharing those things in an appropriate, boundaried way, but just how beautiful and freeing it can be. And so what does it mean to be a neighbor, right? It's to share our gifts and talents and mercy, and then to also share the very gift of ourselves and our hearts, and to bring that into communion with others.
I always love that. Father Boniface points out that the word vulnerability it means woundable, right? That yes. We open ourselves up to being wounded, and that happens more often. The opportunity for that happens more often than we think. Being wounded is somebody looking at you askance. They're gonna look at you sideways because you've expressed something, or you've said something about yourself, or something that you did, or sometimes you just put yourself in a challenging position. The story of the Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite don't want to risk anything,
Yeah.
in order to show mercy to this man on the side of the road, and we have to be willing to risk something. And sometimes I've had times in conversation with people, I offer something up, something of myself that's vulnerable, and occasionally I see them react in a way that's not all that positive.
Yes.
And that's just it's part of what could happen. But that is nothing compared to how many times it opens the door to vulnerability on the part of the other person, or them saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. I've
Yeah.
been feeling whatever." So I think those are the times, and those are the conversations where they have nobody else that's opening the door for them, and they need it. And so our vulnerability opens the door for Christ to come in. He shows the ultimate
Yes.
vulnerability, ultimate woundability on the cross for us. And so we have to be willing to do that, and to be rejected sometimes in the midst of it.
And that's hard, Gary. I've been praying the Litany of Trust, which I'm sure many of our listeners have prayed before. And there's one of the lines that says, "From the fear of what love demands, deliver me, Jesus." And when I was praying this prayer, often what comes up for me when I'm thinking of "from the fear of what love demands," I was thinking about, I have to give of my time, I have to give of myself, I have to extend myself, I have to, right? So maybe it's how love demands service from us, right? And so that's kind of where I was meditating. But more recently, I've been meditating on "from the fear of what love demands, deliver me, Jesus." And what does love demand? It's vulnerability. You can't have love without vulnerability. And I was like, I think that's the thing that actually scares me, right? Because as you said, Gary, to be neighbor means to put myself out there. So that means not just doing a task for somebody, but sending a text that says, "Hey, I'm thinking about you," or inviting somebody over when you could be rejected, or offering a prayer with somebody who, may or may not receive that, or a word of encouragement, or knowing that like the gift of yourself could be rejected. But then also the vulnerability of sharing myself, as you said, Gary. I've had those same experiences where sharing of myself has led to greater relationship and deeper communion, but also where I was like, okay, that was not received very well. And to know like that, but it was still worth it, right? It's still worth it, because more often than not, that sharing of myself is what led to deeper communion. And so what else does love demand in vulnerability? Forgiveness, reconciliation, repair, standing in my shame when I have not been who I've wanted to be, and letting somebody see me in that. And really that love demands vulnerability, and vulnerability is hard, but it's worth it. And I think Brené Brown also talks about like an excruciating vulnerability, or how vulnerability can feel excruciating. And I was reading somewhere that excruciating comes from the word cross,
right?
Crux, right? The cross.
It's an expression that comes into being because of the crucifixion of Christ.
Really?
Yes. It's like excruciating didn't exist before, before the crucifixion of Christ. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it is that. What's really interesting too, though, is there's a loop to be completed. So imagine the scenario: sitting down with somebody, maybe somebody that you don't know very well, but you know that they're coming to you maybe for a little bit of counsel, or a little bit, you sense that they're in need of something, and so in the conversation, you offer up the first foray of vulnerability, and maybe they don't even react well, right? See that, or whatever the reaction is, right? But then at some point, they become vulnerable and they offer something up. here's where the loop is completed, is your response in compassion
Yes.
to their to their openness, right?
Yes.
That's the loop that has to be completed in order for them to feel loved. And honestly, they'll feel loved in a way they've not felt loved. Well, I don't know, but in a way that's rare in the world, say
Yeah.
that. And we just don't have many places in our life where we can be vulnerable, where we can say what's really happened, and trust that the person across from us is going to love us in the midst of it, even if they don't agree, even if they would never do what we did, even if they don't understand why we did it. But they would still love us in it and desire to stay in relationship.
Yes.
They don't run away. They don't turn away. They don't. And so I think that's always the case. Sometimes I feel like I have to buckle up my chair. Like, I'm sitting down with somebody. I'm like, all right, I have to be ready. I don't know what's coming, right? I have to be ready to have a non-anxious presence for them, right?
Yeah.
And resist an urge, because we might, in our own sinfulness, we might have an urge to cringe. We might have an urge to
Oh,
act in
yeah.
whatever way. So we have to prepare ourselves to go beyond what our normal reaction might be and to love them in spite of maybe even a repulsion. I think all of those things are the challenging part of the response, but they're the part that completes the loop. So
Yes.
we have to gear ourselves up for it. We have to be prepared for it, or all of our efforts could come down to that point, and then we react poorly, and it does the opposite of what we always hoped and intended would happen.
Right. And isn't that also part of the cross, Gary? The willingness to suffer on behalf of another, right? Because if we're opening our hearts to receive them, if we're buckling up our chairs, I think that means like we're committed to receiving and to listening. And as you said, staying in relationship. And so if we're really entering into their story with compassion and empathy and our own vulnerability, their stuff is going to hit our stuff. Right?
Yeah, that's the other thing that you can never know, right? You never know what you're going to run into from your own bag of bones.
Yeah, and it's its own suffering. It's its own. It's staying in relationship. It's the cross, but it's what leads us into communion with the other person. And so, right, like trauma, woundedness, it heals in relationship. Really, I think I say this quote a lot when I'm doing the art of accompaniment workshops, but Adam Young has said that the opposite of trauma is just not no trauma. The opposite of trauma is connection.
Mm.
Right? That I can bring this into relationship with somebody. Somebody can make sense of my story. Somebody can love it. And in bringing it in relationship with somebody, I'm in love. I'm bringing it in relationship with God, who is love, the source of love, this communion of persons that he's created us to be. So
Yeah, the beautiful thing about that, too, is that when we enter into these situations, and this is, what may be one of the great revelations for me in being blessed to do any work in ministry, is that when people are vulnerable, very often they share things that help me understand me. Like they share things that help me understand, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm doing that same thing, or I'm doing something related, or that makes sense of this other thing that happened to me. And so in my attempt, sometimes to think that I'm going to be the healer, right? Or the person that helps them along the way, I find that I'm drawn in a way that heals me, that brings me into a better position of my own self-reflection, of my own dealing with my own woundedness. And so while we have to be prepared for a maybe jarring conflict with our own mess, sometimes that is a healing conflict with our own mess.
Exactly. Yes. It really does put us in touch with our own hearts and the places that we need to be loved. And so it's really like the gift that keeps giving. It's difficult and we'd rather run or hide or escape. But when we stay in it, we can really see the redemptive power of love at work in our lives. So, Gary, we have a few minutes left. I'd love to hear how this vulnerability has affected your ministry, and if there are any glory stories or breakthroughs that you've seen in the people that you've worked with.
So one of the things for me is that I always am trying to build into any ministry. I do a lot of big events, and those are great, but I always feel like I have to build into them the opportunity for the individual encounter, the individual one-on-one encounter to happen either with me or with other small group facilitators or with prayer teams sometimes. So always building in the opportunity for that one-on-one encounter to happen, just in case something in this bigger event triggers somebody to want to be, but maybe they're responding to the vulnerability of the speaker, whether it's me or somebody else. Being prepared, building that environment ahead of time where there might be a one-on-one encounter with somebody who is going to love them well and draw close to them. So I think that's a big lesson that I've learned in ministry. That's where the real growth happens individually. And honestly, almost everybody that I rely on to help me in my ministry, volunteers, etc., they're all in it because they were affected by a one-on-one encounter that we built. We built the environment for, and so it's critically important. I feel blessed sometimes that I usually get a sense for the people who have a need for an encounter, have a need for somebody to hear them out a little bit. And I usually, at the end of a talk or end of an event or whatever, I'm looking around the room for who those people are to make sure that they're not left wandering off without having, met someone.
I love how you said that it's critically important to have space and have that baked into your ministry where those one-on-one encounters are happening. I think like programs are great, but really putting skin in the game and entering into relationships with others is where we're really going to see transformation happen in our parishes and in those that we're ministering to. So beautiful that you're so intentional.
Art of accompaniment, we're planning on using that as a springboard for the way we're going to do our OCIA program going forward, is that is going to be at the core. So that every person that comes in and thinks they want to come in on the journey with the Lord, that they're going to be offered an opportunity to be accompanied spiritually. So they have somebody who will respond well to them and their difficulties, their challenges, the bumps in the road that they encounter. So we're really looking forward to making that a staple of what we do and continue to build sort of a small army, if you will, of people who will be spiritual companions.
Yes, that's beautiful. So Gary has had a few folks from his parish take our SD1 Art of Accompaniment course. So he's building up a small army of those equipped to accompany as a spiritual companion in the parish. And so just really appreciate how intentional you are about accompaniment in the work that you do in evangelization. And as we've witnessed in this conversation, it's had some transformational effects. So,
it's been a blessing. Just every time that you see that connection, it just spurs you on for more ministry. And really focuses you on that, and you become better at recognizing and understanding, and I think you just become more Christ-like. That sounds arrogant. I'm sorry. It's hard to know that, but it's true, and I think that in a way that I feel about people. Not necessarily in how they're going to look at me, So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Gary, do you have any final thoughts or reflections for our listeners today before we part ways?
I would just say this, that everybody is called to accompany somebody.
Yes.
And most often, I find, as I'm trying to engage people in ministry and get them to volunteer and be part of what we're doing, they always feel like they don't want to jump in because they don't know enough about the faith. Well, I'll tell you what, there's a great point of vulnerability, is saying, you know what, I don't really know that about my faith. Let's find out. You know what I mean? Like, let's dig in, and acknowledging our lack of faith, or our lack of understanding or knowledge about something, is a great area of vulnerability, which is going to attract other people.
Yes.
Just start understanding that about ourselves, we would be so much better at accompanying others and bringing them closer to the faith.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for those parting words. So, Gary, I'm also going to put a link to some of your resources in our show notes. I'll put a link to your book, and then also a link to your blog, hookedonjoy.org, so our listeners can stay connected with you and your work.
I write about the Gospels every day. Sometimes I delve into the other readings, but usually about the Gospels. And I'd love it if people come check that out.
Good. Fantastic. All right. Well, Gary, it was so nice connecting with you today. Thanks for sharing your heart with us on the podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me. This was a lot of fun. Glad to come back anytime. Always great to have a conversation with you, Kristin. Look forward to many of those in the future.